Beneath the scorched dunes of a forgotten desert, time held its breath. Winds carried the memory of a titan lost to the shifting sands. Buried in silence, the last Egyptosaurus dreamed of rivers long vanished and battles long lost. Now the earth trembled again. New beasts ruled the land, and shadows crept across the sunlit plains. But the desert had not forgotten its champion. Awakened by drought, hunger, and war, the sand titan would rise. Not for vengeance, but to reclaim balance. His footsteps would shake the bones of empires. His roar would remind the world that giants still walk. The desert stretched endlessly, a golden sea that shimmered beneath the weight of the sun. No trees stood here. No rivers ran. Only sand and stone and the bones of forgotten giants. Wind curled through the canyons and dunes, whispering through ancient fossils that had not seen light in millions of years. And beneath it all, something slept. Far beneath the surface, under layers of hardened earth and time, a heartbeat stirred. Long ago, this land had not been a desert. It had flowed with water, brimming with trees, reeds, and life. The Nile branch had carved deep channels, and herds of massive creatures wandered across fertile plains. Among them walked the Egyptosaurus, the sand titan. Towering, strong, and silent, it reigned over the southern floodlands. It lived not with violence but with presence. When it passed, the earth bent beneath it. When it roared, the jungle hushed. But the world changed. Water faded. Forests died. Enemies grew more vicious. In one final war of claw and fire, the Egyptosaurus was defeated by a ruthless Spinosaurus clan, cast down into a ravine and buried beneath the collapsing earth. The clan believed it dead. The desert believed it lost. But deep below, the titan survived. It slept for centuries, its body preserved by the dry earth, its mind drifting through memory. Dreams of flowing rivers. Dreams of warm sunlight. Dreams of rising again. Now, in the age of endless drought, the sands shifted. Storms struck with unusual force. Dry lightning cracked the stone cliffs. The wind grew violent, reshaping the land with every gust. And in one forgotten canyon, a sand dune broke open. A cracked skull emerged, half buried, bleached by time. Eyes opened. Slowly, the titan rose. On the other side of the land, far from the broken canyon, a group of smaller dinosaurs scurried across a dry basin. They had traveled for days in search of water. Their leader, a clever and sharp-eyed dromaeosaur named Tavi, paused on a jagged rock and scanned the horizon. "We keep moving," she said. "There's nothing left here." One of the younger ones pointed at the sky. A storm cloud. It hovered above the southern cliffs, unmoving. "That's not natural," Tavi muttered. She turned back to the group. "Something old has woken." The Egyptosaurus stood now at the edge of the canyon. Dust fell from its hide in sheets. Old scars lined its body. Its muscles ached, but its heart beat with new strength. The world smelled different. The air was thinner. The sun was hotter. But the titan stood tall. It took one slow step forward. The ground cracked. Birds scattered from a cliff ledge nearby. Lizards fled into crevices. A herd of prehistoricatops, grazing farther down the valley, stopped and stared. One of them gave a warning call and bolted. The others followed. But it was not fear that had returned to the land. It was gravity. The Egyptosaurus moved like a living mountain, its tail trailing behind like a sandstorm. It did not look for prey. It looked for home. High on a mesa, an old pterosaur elder watched through narrowed eyes. He had seen many years. He had seen rivers turn to dust and empires rise and vanish beneath stone. But this was not a normal season. He flapped his great wings and took off, his shadow gliding over the broken plains below. "The titan walks again," he whispered to the sky. "And with him comes change." In the northern desert, word spread quickly. Predators listened to the wind and smelled the air. The Spinosaur clan that had once ruled with tooth and terror now sat fractured, scattered by infighting and heat. But one among them still remembered. A warlord named Kale, descendant of the same Spinosaurus that had once led the final battle, stood atop a dune and clenched his claws into the sand. He had heard the stories from his ancestors. Stories of the Titan who had ruled before their rise. The one his bloodline had crushed. Now it returned. Kale's eyes burned. "If it rises," he said, "then we finish what our kind started." Back in the canyon, the Egyptosaurus reached a dry riverbed. It paused. The stones beneath its feet had once been a path of water. Here, fish swam. Here, its herd drank under the moonlight. Now the river was a memory. The Titan looked ahead. The dunes shimmered in the heat. Far in the distance, jagged peaks marked the edge of the world. But it would go farther. For in its chest, something pulled. Not revenge. Purpose. It had not returned to destroy. It had returned to restore. The desert was dying, and the world needed a heartbeat again. The Titan moved through the low dunes with slow but relentless force. Each footstep crushed dry stone into powder. He no longer walked to remember. He walked because the world needed movement. The desert had become too still. He passed the ruins of a dried oasis. The cracked shells of old turtle nests littered the edge. Fossilized tree roots jutted from eroded cliffs. Small lizards watched him from rocks, unmoving, until they realized he was real. The sky turned orange as the sun dipped low. Night in the desert was colder, but the Egyptosaurus kept walking. The stars overhead shimmered, and the Titan looked up. Somewhere beyond those stars was a time that remembered him. Below those stars, only ghosts remained. But ghosts had whispers. And whispers became calls. Far across the sand, in a fractured gorge carved by centuries of wind, a strange light glowed. 3 Deinonychus siblings crouched along the ridge, staring down at the flickering energy twisting from the earth. "What is that?" whispered the youngest. "A signal," the eldest said. They had been tracking old stories, myths of the Sand Titan, passed from wandering herds and half-mad elders. They didn't believe them. Not at first. But now, staring at this glowing scar in the desert, they knew something had changed. The desert had awakened. At the same time, flocks of Quetzalcoatlus soared above the broken lands. One of them carried news. He dove into a crescent-shaped canyon where a hidden settlement of desert dwellers, a mixed herd of peaceful hadrosaurs and armored polycanthus, had survived for generations. The Quetzalcoatlus circled, cawed twice, and landed. The elders gathered. "Is it true?" one of the polycanthus asked. The flyer nodded. "He walks." Gasps spread through the group. "Will he fight the drought? Will he lead us? Will he remember us?" The elder hadrosaur stepped forward. "We do not know, but the sands remember. We must prepare." Meanwhile, at the edge of the basalt cliffs, Kale watched the night pass. He sat beside a fossilized skull, massive, broken. The skull of the very Egyptosaurus his ancestor had crushed. He reached out a claw and touched the ancient bone. "I will finish your story," Kale said, "and make sure it ends with silence." Behind him, his warriors gathered. They had trained for seasons in secret. They had pushed aside smaller rivals, claimed water holes, and forced submission. They were not many, but they were ruthless. And Kale, more than anything, was patient. He knew the Titan would come north. All life drifted there, toward the broken rivers and hidden lakes. Kale would wait. He would strike when the sand was ready. The Egyptosaurus climbed a long slope of cracked shale. At the top stood a formation he remembered. A tall rock tower, once surrounded by forest. He had played here as a hatchling. Now it stood alone, its base hollowed by time. He stepped close and touched the stone with his snout. Memories flowed through him like wind. Of family, of laughter, of the herd. Gone. Still, he kept moving. On the other side of the hill lay a surprise. Water. Not a river, not a lake, but a shallow spring, hidden beneath a fallen slab of ancient rock. The Titan lowered his head and drank. He was not alone. Across the spring, 2 small eyes blinked from behind a rock. A desert velociraptor emerged, scarred and limping. He did not run. The Titan stared. The velociraptor bowed its head slightly. "You returned," the small one said. "They said you were a myth." The Egyptosaurus made no sound, but his eyes told the truth. "I will tell the others," the raptor said. "We need you." Then he disappeared into the brush. The Titan stood for a while. He stared into the water. Ripples moved across the surface. Something deep inside him stirred. Not rage. Responsibility. Words spread like wind. Nomads who wandered alone for years began to move toward the heart of the desert. Families that had not seen one another since the Great Drought reconnected. The Titan's return had not only changed the land. It had changed belief. A giant creature made of horn and muscle moved through the dry hills, a ceratosaurus called Viro. He was feared for his temper but respected for his honesty. When he heard the news, he turned toward the dunes. "If the Titan returns," Viro said, "then I owe him more than memory. I owe him allegiance." As the days passed, the Egyptosaurus began to notice new tracks around him. Other creatures were following. Some approached cautiously, offering fruit, water, or information. Others kept their distance, content to know he was real. The Titan accepted none of their gifts but turned none away. One night, as he crossed a stretch of dark sand lit by starlight, a young oviraptor walked beside him. "Why did you return?" the little one asked. The Titan did not answer. But the oviraptor continued. "Did you come to fight? To lead? Or to show us something else?" Still no answer. The oviraptor stopped. Maybe silence is the only truth left in the desert. The Titan paused. He looked at the small creature. And he gave a single, slow nod. That was enough. Kale's scouts reported the movement of herds. The reshaping of alliances. The awakening of hope. Kale smiled. Hope was just a soft shell waiting to be cracked. He called for his war captains. "Send a message," he said. The following day, a hidden oasis burned. Smoke curled into the sky. Charred bones lay at the edge of the water. There were no survivors. Only a mark burned into the ground. A claw. A challenge. The Titan arrived too late. He stepped into the blackened clearing. He looked at the bones. He touched the scorched earth with one massive foot. He roared. Not in rage. In mourning. The roar traveled far, through the dunes, through the cliffs, into the sky. And it was heard. By Kale. By Viro. By the desert. In the next valley, beneath a crescent moon, something strange happened. The sand shifted. A structure long buried beneath the desert began to re-emerge. It was a circle of stone, massive, ancient, and carved with the symbols of the river clans that had once worshipped the Egyptosaurus as a guardian of balance. The Titan stepped inside the ring. His shadow fell across the ancient markings. Around him, the wind swirled. Symbols glowed faintly. The land remembered him. And now, the land called him to act. Not just as a survivor, not as a memory, as a force. The allies gathered. Viro, the desert warrior. Tavi, the clever dromaeosaur. 3 nomadic ankylosaurs from the crumbling northern plains. The Quetzalcoatlus who had watched the skies for a generation. And more. They came not to follow orders. They came because the Titan's return had stirred something older than fear. Duty. Balance. Hope. Kale moved too. He no longer waited. He marched his warriors across the bone fields, across the salt flats, toward the old river basin where the Titan now stood. His army was small but brutal. Raptors. Spinosaurus. Dilophosaurs bred for speed and poison. He planned not just to kill the Titan. He planned to erase the memory of him. As dawn broke, 2 shapes faced each other across a great empty valley. On one side, Kale, flanked by claws and hunger. On the other, the Titan, flanked by silence and storm. Between them lay the battlefield. Above them, clouds gathered. The Sand Titan took a single step forward. The world seemed to tilt. And the storm began. The storm had arrived not as rain, but as rage. Dust whirled through the valley like ghosts screaming across time. The land held its breath as two forces of history prepared to collide. Kale stood tall atop the ridge, his spine glinting with jagged plates, his eyes glowing with fire. His army spread behind him, raptors with bone armor, venom-laced dilophosaurs, spinosauruses hungry for blood. Across the valley, the Egyptosaurus remained still. The sand titan's head was low, shoulders broad, tail steady like a spear of earth. Behind him stood not soldiers, but believers. Viro, scarred but ready, flanked his right. Tavi, small but fierce, crouched near the canyon mouth with her pack. A dozen others who had never fought together, drawn only by the promise that this time would be different. This time, the desert would not be ruled by fear. The silence broke when Kale roared. The army charged. They moved like a wave of teeth and rage, but the titan did not flinch. His legs shifted. His body anchored. His eyes narrowed. And then he moved. The ground quaked. His tail swung wide, slamming into the first line of dilophosaurs with bone-shattering force. They crumpled into the sand. Tavi and her pack struck next, leaping from high rocks into the chaos, targeting the legs of the charging raptors. The desert lit up with screeches and snarls. Kale lunged forward, claws extended, ignoring the smaller combatants. His only target was the titan. Their eyes locked. Kale struck first. His claws slashed at the titan's flank, drawing blood. The Egyptosaurus countered by twisting his body, using the momentum of his entire mass to knock Kale off balance. Kale staggered but recovered quickly. Their roars tore through the air. This was no battle of speed. This was force versus fury. Viro charged through a line of raptors, tossing one over his back and smashing another with his armored snout. Two more tried to flank him, but an ankylosaur tail crushed them like insects. Above, Quetzalcoatl swooped in, dropping stones onto Kale's backline. Panic spread among the younger Spinos. Still, Kale pushed forward. The titan and Kale slammed into each other again. Dust erupted around them. Their claws raked, their teeth tore. Kale's jaws closed around the titan's shoulder, but the Egyptosaurus lifted him off the ground and threw him across a boulder ridge. Kale landed hard but rolled back up, snarling. "You are old," Kale roared. "I am the land," the titan finally answered. His voice was deep. "Old. Alive." Kale charged once more, faster this time, ducking beneath the titan's tail and striking low. The blow tore into the titan's front leg. He stumbled. The crowd gasped. For the first time, it seemed the sand titan might fall. Kale grinned. He spun around and rushed for a killing strike. But he never reached the neck. A flash of motion. Viro slammed into him from the side. "Not today," Viro growled. The two giants brawled across the sand, a storm of horns and claws. Kale broke away, limping slightly, blood trailing from his jaw. The titan stood again. Though wounded, he pressed forward. Kale turned and ran straight for the old ruins, the circle of stone where the titan had first been awakened. The titan followed. They reached the ancient ring, now half buried in sand. The air here was different, charged with memory, heavy with meaning. Kale stood at its center. "This land belongs to the strong," he growled. "No," the titan said. "It belongs to the balanced." They clashed one final time. This time, the titan did not fight with anger. He fought with rhythm. He moved not like a beast, but like the desert itself. Slow. Measured. Unstoppable. Kale's slashes became frantic. His breathing quickened. His confidence cracked. The titan backed him into the stone circle. Then he rose up on his hind legs, something he had not done in an age, and came down with all the weight of history. The ground split. The stone ring shattered. Kale collapsed, buried beneath rubble. Silence followed. Wind curled around the wreckage. And the storm broke. Rain fell. For the first time in 100 years, the desert drank. The allies approached slowly. Viro stood beside the titan, bloodied but smiling. "It's over," he said. Tavi limped toward them, her eyes wide. "He did it." "No," said the titan quietly. "We did." That night, the valley was quiet again. Fires burned in celebration. The wounded were cared for. The old songs returned. But the Titan did not stay in the center. He stood near the cliff, watching the clouds drift. Mothers brought their young to see him. They stood in awe.
He did not speak.
He did not need to. One of the ankylosaurs carved a new symbol into the side of the ruins. A mountain over water. The mark of the Titan. But no throne was built. No crown placed. Because the Egyptosaurus had not returned to rule. He had returned to remind the world what strength truly was. Not dominance. Balance. The storm was gone. The wind that once howled across the bones of the desert now moved gently through the valley, like a whisper of relief. Where Kale had fallen, only silence remained. The shattered stone circle stood like an open wound, its edges cracked but no longer bleeding. And from the sky, rain continued to fall. It was not a flood, not a storm, just enough to soak the earth. Just enough to fill the old streambeds with water that glittered in the pale light of dawn. Jero, a young protoceratops who had seen the battle from the canyon rim, stepped into the valley for the first time. He approached slowly, his eyes wide. Every story his grandmother told him had come to life. He walked to the edge of a shallow pool forming in the hollow left by Kale's final fall. He looked into the water. There was no monster there. Only sky. The sand titan stood beneath an ancient acacia tree, its branches newly fed by the falling rain.
His wounds had scabbed.
His body was still, but his eyes never stopped moving. He watched the desert breathe. Tavi limped up the slope beside him.
"You could leave now," she said.
"You've done enough. The battle's over." The Titan looked down at her. The battle was over, yes. But the war had never truly been about claws. It had been about memory. About how the land had been forgotten. About how the herds had drifted so far apart that they no longer knew the shape of peace. Across the dunes, the valley had transformed. Where once stood scattered bones and fractured rocks, now flowed life. Small streams formed in the cracked earth, tracing paths once carved by ancient rivers. The stone paths that led between grazing grounds were walked again, not just by survivors, but by friends. Viro led a group of younger ceratosaurs to help rebuild the fallen nests near the burned oasis. "Not every battle ends with fire," he told them. "Some end with seeds." Tavi formed a rotating patrol of mixed species to guard the region, not from enemies, but from imbalance. "We've learned what happens when one voice gets too loud," she said. "Now we listen." Even the smallest creatures returned. Sand-burrowing lizards. Burrowers and beetles. They moved as if they had been waiting. On the third day, the elders gathered. Representatives from the dune clans, the canyon herds, and the nomadic tribes came together beneath the half-fallen stone circle. They brought fruit, water, stories. And they brought a question. What now? The Titan stood before them. He did not answer with words. He stepped into the center of the group. He placed one massive foot into the cracked dirt. And from that place they began to build. Not a palace. Not a monument. A meeting ground. A circle. This time, not one of stone, but of sand and plants and shared space. Children began to draw the symbol in the dirt, a crescent moon over 3 waves. It was not a symbol of war. It was one of return. The Titan had not returned to reclaim a throne. He had returned to remind them that the desert was not meant for rulers. It was meant for balance, for breath, for cycles. One morning, as the sun rose pale and golden, the Titan walked the ridge overlooking the valley. He moved slowly, not from pain, but from peace. His great frame cast a long shadow over the new fields where saplings grew. He saw families sharing space they once fought over. He saw children of raptors playing beside young ankylosaurs. And he saw the bones of the past buried, not with shame, but with honor. Kale's skull had been placed in the canyon mouth, not as a threat, as a memory, a reminder of what happens when fear guides power. A young sauropelta named Luma approached him that morning. She was nervous, her armor still growing in. "Why did you come back?" she asked. The Titan looked at her. In his eyes, she saw it. The answer. "I was never gone," he finally said. And he walked on. Evening came. Stars returned to the sky, clear and sharp. No clouds. No fire. Just quiet. The Titan stood at the edge of the old riverbed, now beginning to trickle with water from melting storm caps far to the west. The water touched his toes. He closed his eyes, and in his mind he saw them. His herd. Long gone. Not forgotten. He did not cry, but something deep in the sand around him seemed to breathe. And in that breath, the past and the future touched. That night, the desert told stories again. Not of extinction, of rebirth, of how the earth once held giants, and how it welcomed them home. The moon hung high above the valley, its pale light washing over the stones, the grasses, and the bodies sleeping peacefully beneath both. Crickets chirped for the first time in months. Tiny frogs sang from the new streambeds. The desert had changed. It was still dry, still vast, still dangerous. But it was no longer dead, and the ones who lived here no longer walked alone. The Sand Titan watched from a high ridge, his body like a mountain under the starlight. The wind moved softly around him now, like an old friend. He breathed in and out, steady, deep, and slow. It had been many cycles since he had first risen from the sands, and in that time he had seen not just battle but rebirth. Where fear once ruled, hope now grew. He saw it in the way herds grazed without tension, in how old rivals drank from the same spring, in how the smallest voice was heard in every gathering. He had not done this alone. He had simply reminded the land of what it already knew. Viro approached just before dawn. His gait was heavier now, not from injury but from experience. He had taken on the responsibility of guiding others, young fighters, former outcasts, even those from Kale's broken clan who had renounced violence. "The northern winds are cooling," Viro said. "The dry season won't bite as hard this year. The ground holds moisture longer now. Trees are coming back." The Titan nodded. Viro stepped forward, then hesitated. "They want you to lead."
To stay.
"To rule." The Titan looked at him, his eyes clear. "I will not lead them," he said, quiet and firm. "They will lead themselves." Viro smiled. "I thought you'd say that." He turned to leave, but stopped once more. "You showed us how to be more than survivors." The Titan gave no answer. Some truths didn't need to be repeated. Tavi stood at the edge of the new meeting ground. Around her, young dinosaurs practiced diplomacy instead of defense. There were no fences, no guards, just fire circles, dried leaves, and stories. She had taught them to listen, to think before they lunged, to see value in voices unlike their own. When she looked to the ridge, she could just make out the shape of the Titan, watching from afar. She whispered to herself, "We'll be all right." And deep down she believed it. The stone ruins were overgrown now. Vines traced the old carvings. Flowers bloomed in the crevices. What had once been a battlefield was now a place of learning. The young gathered here, touching the old symbols and asking questions. Who was the Titan? Was he a king? Did he fly? Elders answered with different words, but the same truth. He was not a ruler. He was not a god. He was a memory made real. And we remembered who we were through him. And that was enough. A carving had been added to the base of the main stone arch. It showed the Titan in silhouette, head low, tail long, walking through an open desert. Behind him, footprints of many kinds, all walking together. The carving had no name etched below it, because the Sand Titan never asked for a title. He asked only that they walk forward, together. In the seasons that followed, the valley bloomed. New species returned from the edges of extinction. Old trails were restored. Peace did not come easily, but it came through intention. And whenever conflict rose, the valley remembered what had happened when giants roared. They remembered how silence could be power, how stillness could be strength, and how the softest steps could echo longest. The Sand Titan stood on the edge of the world again. He looked out over the lands beyond, the old floodplains, the distant forests, the salt dunes farther west. He had done what he came to do. He had stirred the stillness. He had woken the memory. And now he would walk again, not to conquer, not to be seen, but to make space for life. A small figure joined him, Luma, the young sauropelta with bright eyes and endless questions. Where will you go? The Titan looked far, far ahead. Where I'm needed. Luma tilted her head. Will you come back? He looked at her and nodded. Not as I am, but I will always be near. She stepped forward and gently pressed her snout to his leg. Thank you. He turned slowly, then began to walk, not into the heart of the valley, but out of it, into the dunes, into the wind, into the legend. They say if you stand at the stone circle on a windless night, you can feel the earth move. Not a quake, not a storm, just a slow, steady pulse beneath your feet. The heartbeat of a titan, still walking, still listening, still reminding the world that it was never meant to stand alone.